In the late 1990s, I was a 40-year-old U.S. Army major working in the Pentagon as a military intelligence officer. I had been in the Army for 9 years before that, most of that time spent in a Special Forces unit. I was living on my own, pending divorce from my ex-bitch wife. I didn't go to bars to meet women, I just didn't see the percentages, so I went online. I joined a foreign chat room and lurked around for a while until I figured out how things worked. Eventually, I met a delightful high school teacher, smart, witty, and very fast. We communicated easily in English even though she lived in Singapore. A few months later, I still hadn't seen her picture, didn't know her age, and hardly knew her location. But we got along so well that I went online at every opportunity. We chatted about everything and everyone. I was absolutely intrigued. I found out she was 24 years old. She sent me a lesson plan she had just finished. It was brilliant, accurate, concise, clear, and very emotional. The students enjoyed actively participating in it. Finally, a year or so after meeting online, she sent me a picture. I was stunned. She was a dark-skinned Indian woman with very Aryan, almost Anglo-facial features. She was almost model-thin. Her abs were slightly bare and well-defined. Her breasts looked like large B cups, maybe small C's. Hell, I knew, but they looked great. Her smile was sparkling, and her eyes were the very real definition of bedroom eyes. I was overwhelmed and in a state of constant arousal. A few weeks later, she offered to come visit me. Once again, I was dumbfounded. Yes, all my professional instincts were screaming at me that she must be a spy seducing me. However, as a former counterintelligence officer, I had vetted her in every way possible. I asked all the questions, verified the information, and checked her out. She was clean, so I agreed that she should come, but I didn't ask how. How does she pay for the flight? There was another question I didn't ask. Guess what it was? A few weeks later, I came to pick her up in Newark, New Jersey, and we had an emotional reunion. First, when she walked down the ramp from the international airport, she was just hot. She exuded sex appeal. Her eyes sparkled, her smile was radiant, and her hips were mesmerizing. We kissed, we melted, we drew closer. My height was 6 feet and hers was probably 5 feet 5 inches. We got her luggage and headed west on I-78, stopping for the night in Clinton, New Jersey. Our night was loving, passionate, and almost non-stop. She was so engaging, intelligent, and mesmerizing that we immediately hit it off. The next day, we drove to my 2-bedroom apartment and settled in for the next few weeks. I took a vacation, and we spent a few days exploring downtown Washington, D.C. We took a drive down Skyline Drive and the Shenandoah Valley. We found out that she is an old-fashioned soul and knows a lot about the 60s through the 90s, including music. She didn't set off any alarms, and I am a very skeptical person. Everything was fine as far as I was concerned. We discussed that after she returned home, she would move in and live with me. She agreed. She flew to Singapore, spent a few weeks finalizing things, and then came back. This time, she flew to Washington, D.C. Life was good. After a few months of bliss, the apartment complex notified us that it was kicking us out of our home to convert it to condos. We ended up finding a condo near the mosque in Falls Church since she was Muslim. My spidey sense fluttered a little with alarm. A few months later, a man showed up outside our apartment. She kept me away from the windows. It turned out to be her husband, a Singapore Airlines pilot. Oh shit, she went out to chat with him. Double shit. After a while, she came back and we sat down at the table to discuss the problem. She promised to go back to Singapore and divorce him. Divorce him, and I didn't even know she was married. That also explained how she was paying for her trips since spouses fly for free. Okay, I was angry and I should have kicked her out of the house at that point, but I had a perfectly wonderful life with her by my side. Hell, he was paying for most of it, so why not? She flew back to get a divorce in a Sharia court in Singapore. The concept of her utilizing the services of a Sharia court confused me and increased my anxiety. It took a few weeks longer than I expected, but eventually she came back. It was a wonderful reunion. She wasn't working, so she spent her time at a Starbucks near the Pentagon. A few weeks later, she said, "American men are so friendly, they always come up to me and chat with me." I replied, "American men aren't friendly. They want to pick you up and sleep with you." A few weeks later, she confirmed that was exactly what they wanted to do, but it never happened as far as I know. Then my 3 years at the Pentagon came to an end. We had a farewell luncheon for me at Rosslyn, and she joined us. It was the first time I met her, and the whole gang was blown away. We spent 1 year in ROTC hell. I was the executive officer of the ROTC battalion. I began to mentally prepare for retirement. A few months before starting university, she started having mental health problems. She started hitting me, kicking me, and screaming when I was driving. One time, she even tried to throw herself out of the car. One day, we were pulled over by the New Jersey State Police and someone denounced us. Surprisingly, she confirmed my story. At home, she became suicidal, so I took all the sharp knives in the house, put them in a canvas bag, and threw them out the window. It got to the point where I had to call the police. They focused on me as the abused spouse because my entire right side was black and blue. They arrested her for spousal abuse and put her in the psychiatric ward at Newark Hospital. The next night, a hurricane blew through, flooding everything around her. I had promised to visit her, so I hit the road. I had never seen water rushing out of manholes before, rising 20 feet high in places. But I made it to the site. I went inside, checked in, and sat down next to her. She was lonely, scared, and exhausted on the inside. She knew she needed help, and I assured her I would be there for her, but she needed to get better. After just a few days, she started taking her medication, and the change was dramatic. She continued to take her prescription medication. After a few months, she had a clean record, and we both fell deeply in love. I asked her to marry me, and she agreed. I asked my parents to be witnesses, and we had a simple civil ceremony. At the end of the school year, the Army decided to replace me with a civilian contractor, and I found a unit in Washington that needed me. I didn't make it to the front door before the G3, who knew me from Haiti, took me on as his planning officer. When we were in Haiti, he was my supervisor for one day when I authorized an operation to capture one of the 10 most wanted. I told him about it. We both went straight to the task force commander, who referred us straight to the Attorney General. I tried to force the issue of submitting targeting packages to the 10th. They were never approved, but we had a grudge against them. The Director General escorted us to the U.S. Embassy. A few minutes later, we had a secure VTC with the State Department. They finally admitted that they were only forcing us to submit packages for political purposes. After that, we never filed target packets again and saved a lot of unnecessary work. The G3 in my new unit loved me. G3 plans in an intelligence unit are really boring. We had a new commander that I worked with and for, and he took me on as his writer-slide bitch. I developed a seriously classified concept of operations for a special project using SAP as a proof of concept. 8 months before September 11th, I used Osama bin Laden as a focus in an unclassified document. During that time, my wife and I attended embassy parties around Washington, D.C. At one of them, I met a snake in the grass named John. Like a guided missile, he targeted my wife like she was the juiciest dish in town, and she was the most magnificent creature that evening, without a doubt. Then we learned that he was heading up the State Department's work on the country, which was the subject of her master's thesis. My alarm klaxons began to ring loudly. The body language of these two was unmistakable. They wanted each other. As quietly and quickly as possible, I got her out the door and took her home. But it was too late. In the weeks that followed, she said she met him for information, advice, and finally friendship. Then all mention of his name stopped. One evening, she approached me and asked if we could talk. I had an affair with John. It was just once, and it happened in his apartment downtown. Inside, I was furious. I was devoted to her, loved her, cared for her, and I had warned her repeatedly about him in particular. He was very charismatic, but it was obvious he was an experienced predator. She didn't stand a chance. I loved her, cared deeply for her, and she confessed. She was remorseful, repentant, and swore it wouldn't happen again. I relented and said we would work it out. Life went on. I worked like hell to keep her thoughts on me, on us. Meanwhile, the CG and I were presenting his draft to anyone and everyone in authority: the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Senate Intelligence Committee, the House Intelligence Committee, the NSA, the CIA, and so on. Then, September 11th, 2001 happened. The next day, we received full funding for our project. That same day, I approached G3 and CG to help with the planned invasion of Afghanistan. I traveled on the first plane to Fort Benning for training, then to MacDill Air Force Base for intelligence planning for the invasion. I returned to Washington several times to get allocated funds and attended one unclassified intelligence conference to discuss the damn definition of a terrorist group. My wife joined me. She drove my SUV to Tampa and stayed for a while. It was a tearful goodbye. She saw that I was wearing the green beret again, that I was exhausted from 18-hour days, but I was happier than a pig in snot because I was damn good at my job and making a huge contribution. I called her every night. That doesn't mean I was a saint. Strip clubs became free for the military. My best friend and I learned that the 6-inch rule meant hands up. I learned the difference between the sensation of saline and silicone. It didn't take more than an hour. I was exhausted. Finally, the day came when I joined the Special Operations Planning Team in Qatar. It was constantly 120 degrees in the shade during the day. We started each planning session with the Pink song, "Let's Get This Party Started." Imagine grown men, all special forces, SEALs, Rangers, etc., dancing to that song. It is still one of my most cherished memories. I had access to a VoIP phone so I could call my wife from work anytime. I didn't want to call too often, but I noticed that on weekends I had a hard time getting through to her. Never. I would call later and she would say, "My phone's battery died, I was in a dead zone," and so on. I forgot my phone. This was despite the fact that she was traveling to New Jersey to finish a master's degree that I was paying for. I was beyond furious, and I confronted her face to face. "I would never cheat on you," she said. That night, on the way back from Skiff where we worked, I said to my best friend, "I think she's cheating on me." My best friend replied, "She would never cheat on you? You're too nice a guy." Then I went to Afghanistan. Rugged, constantly snow-covered mountains, 120 degrees in the daytime. I watched a man hunting a sparrow with a homemade slingshot. I realized that if he didn't kill the sparrow, he wouldn't eat. I bought burgas for all my female relatives. I was also offered Makarov pistols, slightly bloody Soviet uniforms, mortar shells, Soviet bayonets, and so on. There were minefields everywhere. It had been a little over a decade since the Soviet Union had left. After a while, I started getting a chest cough. The roads are covered with a thin talcum powder-like dust, an inch thick. People squat and crap on the roads, and this dust grinds up and turns to dust. I must have inhaled some of it. I was coughing so badly that I kept my tent neighbors awake. I was sent back to Qatar and then to MacDill. At BWI, I met my wife, and we had a tearful, passionate reunion. The next morning, I flew out to Tampa. I didn't notice that most of her stuff was gone. I spent the weekend in shock, seeing naked female flesh on public display. In Afghanistan, we were shown T&A, i.e. toes and ankles, on a daily basis. Eventually, I checked out of the unit, got into my amazingly well-maintained SUV, and decided to surprise my wife by driving a straight line from Tampa to Washington, D.C. You know where this is going, don't you? I arrived at 7 a.m., which for normal people is 7 a.m. The house was empty. She was gone. All her stuff was gone. No note. I expected to hear, "I hate you, I'm leaving," but nothing. In 2 days, she'd gone from a loving, welcoming wife to a ghost. I didn't beat her, cheat on her, gamble, drink, or abuse her in any way. She left me without a word. Not a word. Not one. Not a word. I returned to my unit in desert camouflage and a sun-scorched beard. I was in a state of shock. I walked like a zombie. What had I done wrong? Had she been a spy all this time? Had I not been man enough? Was I not big enough? Is my character really that disgusting? Then I discovered that she had cleaned out my bank accounts. I only had $80, enough to last me 24 days until my next paycheck. Then she called me, "Do you want to come over to my place and see where I live?" Sure enough, we picked a time. It was on Van Dorn Street. I went in. Everything looked abandoned, empty, unkept. We talked. I got no explanation. Then I was asked to leave. I did so in silence. At least we were talking, I thought. Little did I know. A few days later, she called and asked me to drop off some spices she'd forgotten. I did so. Second strike. Finally, I made lunch and we were going to sit down and talk on Saturday. She got sick and didn't show up. I drove to her place, picking up some medication. I knocked. There was no answer, but the peephole opened and closed. I hung my bag on the doorknob and left. On the way out, in the parking lot, I recognized the truck belonging to a fellow veteran from my days at ROTC, where she was in grad school. We had even visited his home in New Jersey. All the tumblers fell into place, and the door opened. She was cohabitating with Rick. He was the common factor in all her disappearances. I tried the phone. I was angry, but I tried to stay calm. I was furious. This asshole seduced my wife and stole her away from me. That was on a Saturday. Sunday afternoon, I got a call from the Alexandria Police Department asking if I could stop by and see them. I replied that, of course. I stopped by. The female detective asked me a bunch of questions about my wife. She was nice, very disarming. I was then asked to write a statement describing my 3 visits to my wife. She then showed me my wife's statement. It was almost identical. Then the detective said, "I'm arresting you on a charge of stalking." Stalking? Hell, she invited me over, asked me to drop off my stuff, and then I took care of her health. Then she dumped another load of crap on me. Not only were they keeping me in jail all night because it was Sunday, they were going to come to my house to confiscate my extensive gun collection because she thought I was dangerous. After all, I was a Green Beret. I simply asked her to pass a note to the Justice of the Peace that I wasn't furious now, but would be if they continued. A threat? Number, I tried to avoid the implication. I was released the next day. Sheriff's deputies escorted me home and confiscated the guns, which were returned a few weeks later. I called work and explained what had happened. I then took a shower, got dressed, and went to work. I was in charge of SAP, my dream job, but found that my code didn't work. Anytime you get arrested, this happens. My dream job was gone from under my feet, so I did the sensible thing and sat on my back patio and cried every night. I don't drink, so it was a blessing, but I tried it a few times. I was clinically depressed and went to a psychologist who asked if I needed drugs. I asked how long they lasted. I was told 6 weeks, and I refused. I could have rejuvenated myself sooner. She also put a restraining order on me prohibiting any contact. I realized that what my soon-to-be ex did could be portrayed as applying for a green card under false pretenses, so I decided to get tough. I talked to her friends and simply stated that if she didn't drop the stalking charge, I would get her deported. It worked, but I disappeared from SAP forever. I retired a year later after 27 years in the military. I honestly don't remember how the divorce happened, but I have the decree. Then she moved to California, to Oceanside. She dropped out of graduate school and went into real estate sales. Years later, I met a wonderful woman in New York, went to see her, and our first kiss took place in the newly fallen snow. After retiring, I got a job with a military agency and had to visit their office in San Diego near Oceanside. I called and my ex and I arranged to meet for breakfast. I was finally able to ask why. She found one porn tape of mine, an old one, and decided it wasn't enough for me. Thanks, Rick. She felt powerless, so she arrested me. Thanks, Rick. Not one good reason. Burn in hell, Rick. I married that hot-tempered, feisty Puerto Rican from New York. I, on the other hand, am a white-bread Pennsylvania Dutch. Our cultures are polar opposite, but our thought processes are remarkably similar. We love many of the same things: music, books, and more. We also love our differences. A few years later, I saw an ad for a fundraiser for my ex's rehab. I learned that she had used my money to buy a house in Oceanside. During the move, she fell and broke her neck in 2 places. Isn't that bitch karma? Now she's a quadriplegic, bedridden, and pondering the why of it. In 2018, she married a green card applicant. I have to turn him in. And the final touch of karma? Rick lives in Oceanside, too, so he posted on Facebook, "Yeah, touch that dead ass," quite literally. I love karma.